A school trip vanished 27 years ago. No trace, no answers, until now. In Las Vegas, Maggie Ellison clings to hope for her lost daughter, Clara. One photo ignites a mystery that shatters silence. Secrets unravel, truths shock. Can she find peace? Let's dive into this story. The Las Vegas dawn crept through the blinds of Margaret Maggie Ellison's modest bungalow, casting thin gray slivers across the hardwood floor on September 28, 2023. At 58, Maggie woke with a heaviness that pressed against her ribs, her hazel eyes tracing the ceiling as the date sank in. 27 years since her daughter Clara vanished with her fifth-grade class on a school trip, leaving no trace but a void that swallowed her life. The sky beyond her window hung low, clouds thick and somber, mirroring the ache she'd braced for all month, a storm she couldn't outrun. Maggie eased from bed, her joints stiff from restless sleep, her chestnut hair streaked with silver falling loose as she shuffled to the dresser. There, pinned to the mirror's edge, hung a photo. Clara at 9, her school uniform crisp, her grin wide with gap-toothed mischief, brown curls bouncing. Maggie's fingers brushed the frame, her breath catching. "Oh, Clara," her voice a cracked whisper, tears welling as she pressed the image to her chest. She'd prepared for this day. Every year, a ritual of grief, but the weight never lightened, a tide of sorrow threatening to pull her under. With a deep breath, she steadied herself. Stay strong, a mantra forged through decades of unanswered questions. The house was quiet, too quiet, since her husband Tom's heart attack 5 years ago left her alone, his steady presence a memory she clung to on days like this. She splashed cold water on her face, the shock grounding her, then dressed, jeans, a faded sweater, each motion deliberate, a shield against the unraveling within. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Susan Miles, her closest friend since that fateful day. "You're not alone, we all remember. Come over any time." Susan's son Tommy had vanished too, their shared loss a bond no one else could touch. Maggie typed back, "Can I come now?" Susan's reply, instant. "Doors open." In the kitchen, Maggie gathered Earl Grey tea packets and a jar of oatmeal cookies, small comforts she couldn't bear to bring empty-handed, even after 27 years of friendship. She stepped outside, the cool air biting her cheeks, locking the door behind her as the neighborhood stretched silent under the overcast sky. Las Vegas sprawled beyond, neon dormant in daylight. But here, in her quiet corner, time seemed frozen. Houses unchanged since Clara's laughter once filled these streets. Maggie walked the few blocks to Susan's, her boots scuffing the sidewalk, her mind drifting to the emptiness that had shadowed her since Tom's passing. Susan, her lifeline through the darkest stretches. Clara's disappearance had shattered her world. September 28, 1996, a school trip meant for Big Ben Park, 15 kids and their teacher, Mr. Daniel Foster, gone without a whisper. The police suspected Foster, his vanishing too convenient. But no bodies, no clues, just a case that chilled to silence. Maggie had clung to hope, a mother's desperate thread, through vigils, searches, sleepless nights. Even as leads dried and the world moved on, Tom had held her then. "We'll find her," his faith a rock until his own loss left her adrift. Susan's quiet strength her only tether now. Susan's bungalow loomed, a faded yellow haven, its porch sagging but welcoming. As Maggie approached, the front door swinging wide before she could knock. Susan stood there, graying blonde hair pulled back, her blue eyes soft with understanding, enfolding Maggie in a hug that smelled of lavender and memory. "Come in," she said, voice gentle, ushering Maggie inside. Maggie handed over the tea and cookies. Couldn't come empty, and Susan's smile warmed, a flicker of light in the gloom. They moved to the kitchen, Susan filling a kettle as Maggie sank onto the living room couch, its worn cushions a familiar cradle on this jagged day. The kettle hissed, steam curling as Susan joined her, setting 2 mugs on the coffee table, Earl Grey's scent rising, a fragile piece. "How are you holding?" Susan asked, her tone a quiet bridge over their shared abyss. Maggie sighed, fingers tracing the mug's rim. "Trying. It's always this day, you know. The rest I manage, but today..." She trailed off, eyes downcast, the ache a living thing. Susan nodded. "Same for me." Her own loss a mirror, Tommy's absence a twin scar. "Therapy helped," Susan said. "But this date, it's a beast." Maggie's lips twitched. "Beast, yeah." Grateful for Susan's presence. a solidarity no words could fully hold. They sipped in silence, the tea's warmth seeping into Maggie's bones, easing the edges of a grief she'd worn like a second skin. Susan's home, photos on the mantel, Tommy's baseball glove framed, offered a comfort Las Vegas's sprawl couldn't touch, a sanctuary where their pain found echo. Maggie's mind flickered, Clara's curls, her chatter, memories she'd guarded through 27 years of cold trails and faded hope. Today wasn't just mourning, it was resolve, a promise to keep Clara's light alive, even if answers never came. Little did she know this day, steeped in echoes, would spark a thread to unravel the past she'd never stopped chasing. The Las Vegas afternoon hung heavy in Susan Miles's living room, the muted hum of a distant air conditioner blending with the faint clink of teacups as Margaret Maggie Ellison settled deeper into the sagging couch. The scent of Earl Grey and lavender curled through the air, a fragile warmth threading through the gray weight of September 28th, 2023, 27 years since Clara and Tommy vanished. Susan sat beside her, blonde hair streaked with gray, pulled into a loose bun, her blue eyes soft with a shared sorrow as she sipped her tea, the mug trembling slightly in her hands. Maggie's hazel gaze drifted to the mantel, Tommy's baseball glove framed, a silent sentinel, her own grief a mirror to the stillness here. "Thanks for this," Maggie said, her voice low, rough from the tears she'd held back on the walkover. Susan's smile was small, tender. Always. Her presence a lifeline Maggie had clung to since Tom's death left her adrift. The cookies sat untouched on the coffee table, their oatmeal scent mingling with the tea, a gesture Maggie couldn't skip even on this jagged day. "Hardest day," she murmured, fingers tracing the mug's rim, the steam fogging her glasses faintly. Susan nodded, setting her cup down. Therapy dulled it some, but not today. Her voice a quiet echo of Maggie's ache, their losses twin shadows cast across decades. The room breathed with memory, Susan's walls lined with faded photos, a patchwork of happier times before the silence took hold. Maggie's mind flickered, Clara's giggle, her small hand tugging for attention. But she anchored herself here, Susan's steady gaze a tether. "My shrink said something useful," Susan offered, leaning forward, her tone gentle but firm. "Face the pain, don't dodge it, let it sit with you." Maggie's lips twitched. Easier said, but Susan's nod held no judgment. "Thought maybe—" Susan hesitated, glancing at the TV cabinet. "We could look at photos together, if you're up for it." Maggie's breath caught. Photos, a tide of memory she both craved and feared. She sipped her tea, the warmth steadying her, then nodded. "Yeah, might help." Her voice soft, a crack opening to the past. Susan rose, her slippers scuffing the hardwood as she crossed to the cabinet, pulling out a thick album, its cover worn from years of quiet reverence. She returned, settling close, the album a bridge between them as she flipped it open, snapshots spilling forth, a chronicle of lost light. First days of school, birthday candles, picnics under Vegas's rare shade, Clara and Tommy beaming, their innocence a dagger now. "Look at this," Maggie said, pointing to a faded shot, Clara in pigtails, Tommy beside her, their fifth-grade uniforms crisp at a school gate. "Grade 5, new school," she murmured, a smile tugging despite the sting. Susan's eyes crinkled. 2 years old, that place. Hustled for kids with those cheap fees. Her laugh a bittersweet note. "Clara loved it. Small class, 6 at first, 15 by year's end," Maggie added, her finger lingering on her daughter's grin. A warmth she'd guarded through 27 years of cold trails. The pages turned, science fairs, field days, each image a shard of a life stolen, their voices weaving laughter and tears. Then Maggie's hand froze. A photo she'd never seen, slipped between familiar shots. Clara and Tommy at a science fair, poster boards bright with glue and glitter, their faces alight with pride. "This one," she whispered, lifting it closer, her pulse quickening. "Where'd this come from?" The edges crisp, unlike the album's wear. Susan leaned in. "Police sent it, months back, when the case iced again. Got copies of evidence stuff." Her voice steady, but her brow furrowed. "Didn't know we could," Maggie said, surprise sharpening her tone. "I didn't either. Grabbed it all, but—" Susan trailed off, eyes distant. Harder to let go with it. Maggie nodded, her gaze locked on the image, Clara's curls, Tommy's gap-toothed glee. But another photo beneath caught her breath. A class shot, 15 kids in front of a yellow school bus, the one that vanished. She slid it free, her fingers trembling. This, and there, among the children, stood Principal Evelyn Hart, her stern smile a jolt against the memory of Mr. Daniel Foster, alone. "Susan," Maggie said, voice tight, "why's Evelyn here? I thought it was just Foster and a staffer." Susan squinted. "Heard whispers. Some parents said she went, but—" Her shrug faltered, doubt flickering. Maggie's mind raced. 27 years, the story fixed. Foster, the teacher, vanishing with the class, a suspect with no proof, no bodies, just silence. Evelyn Hart, principal, distant, offering condolences, never part of that tale. "This bus," Maggie murmured, tracing its outline. "The trip, Big Bend, right?" Susan nodded. "Yeah, that's what they said." But her voice wavered, the photo a crack in their shared script. "She's not supposed to be there," Maggie pressed, her hazel eyes narrowing. Was she? A thread tugging at the edges of a past she'd clung to. Hope a whisper against the weight of loss. "Can I take this?" Maggie asked, holding the photo, its crisp edges a lifeline she couldn't release. Susan hesitated. "Sure, but—" Her blue eyes softened. "Don't let it eat you, Maggie." Maggie's nod was firm. "I won't." But her pulse thrummed, the image burning in her grip. Evelyn's presence a shadow she'd never seen, a question she'd never asked. The tea cooled, the album closed, but Maggie's resolve flared. Clara's grin, this bus, a detail overlooked, a spark igniting in Las Vegas's quiet, poised to unravel a veil she'd never dared lift. The Las Vegas dusk draped a muted veil over Margaret Maggie, Ellison's quiet neighborhood, as she stepped from Susan Miles's bungalow, the borrowed class photo pressed tight against her chest, its crisp edges digging into her palm. The gray clouds overhead thickened, a damp chill seeping through her faded sweater. But Maggie's hazel eyes burned with a flicker of something new. Unease, yes, but beneath it, a thread of hope she hadn't felt in years. September 28th, 2023, 27 years since Clara vanished, had begun with grief's familiar weight, but Susan's album had shifted it. Evelyn Hart's stern face in that yellow bus snapshot, a riddle Maggie couldn't shake. Her boots scuffed the sidewalk, the short walk home a blur as her mind churned. Why was Evelyn there? The principal's presence clashing with the story, etched in her memory. Mr. Daniel Foster, the teacher, disappearing with Clara's class, a lone suspect in a case gone cold. She'd clung to that narrative, 15 kids, a bus, Big Bend Park, through vigils and dead ends, but this photo cracked it open. Susan's words, "Heard whispers she went," looped, a whisper Maggie couldn't silence as she turned not toward home, but the bus stop, her resolve pulling her elsewhere. Clara's grave, a ritual she'd never skipped on this day. The bus rumbled up, its doors hissing open, and Maggie climbed aboard, settling by a window streaked with the day's dust. Las Vegas sprawled beyond, neon flickers waking in the distance, but her focus stayed on the photo, slipped from her purse. Clara's curls, Tommy's grin, Evelyn Hart among them, her smile tight against the yellow bus. "Taken before the trip," Susan had echoed Evelyn's claim, but the principal's unease, those rumors, gnawed at Maggie. She'd been active, school meetings, hearings, yet this detail had slipped past, a shadow unseen in 27 years of searching. The cemetery loomed, iron gates weathered, headstones tilting under twilight, and Maggie disembarked, the air sharp with sage and earth, her breath fogging as she walked the familiar path. Clara's plot waited, a small gray stone, no body beneath, just a name carved in hope. Clara Ellison, 1987 to 1996. Maggie knelt, her knees sinking into damp grass, and set a bouquet of daisies, Clara's favorite, against the marker, her fingers tracing the letters, worn smooth by years of touch. "Hey, sweet girl," she whispered, voice cracking, tears spilling as the emptiness hit anew. A grave without closure, a mother without answers. She pulled the photo from her purse, holding it beside the stone, Clara's grin a mirror to the memory of her last hug, her "Bye, Mom," before that bus rolled away. Evelyn wasn't supposed to be there, Maggie murmured, her gaze locking on the principal's figure, a question she'd never asked piercing through. What if she knew something? The wind stirred, rustling the daisies, and Maggie's pulse quickened. 27 years of silence, a case iced over. But this thread, this shadow, tugged at her. She'd faced the worst, Tom's death, the void. Yet Clara's light kept her fighting, a mother's vow unbroken. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Susan probably, but Maggie ignored it, digging instead for Officer Paul Tran's number, saved from years past when he'd led the case. Paul, steady, gruff, had chased every lead until they dried, his "we'll find them" fading to apologies as time stretched thin. She hesitated. Would he even remember? The number a relic, but the photo's weight pushed her forward. She dialed, pressing the phone tight to her ear, the line ringing once, twice, then silence. No answer, just a voicemail drone she couldn't face. "Paul, it's Maggie. Call me." Too desperate, she thought, ending it without a word. She tried again, ring, ring, nothing, her stomach clenching as she slipped the phone back, the photo trembling in her grip. "Why's she there, Clara?" she whispered, staring at Evelyn's tight smile. Before the trip, or on it? Susan's whispers clashing with Paul's old reports. Foster alone, a staffer, no principal. Maggie had prided herself, active, involved, yet this slipped past, a detail buried in 27 years of dust. The sky darkened, clouds pressing low, and she stood, knees aching, the daisies a splash of white against gray, a promise renewed, "I'll find you still." The cemetery stretched quiet, headstones silent, the wind her only company, as Maggie lingered, her mind racing. She'd faced reporters, courts, her own unraveling after Tom. Each year, this day, a knife twisting deeper. But this photo shifted it, a thread unseen, a question unasked. "Evelyn Hart," she muttered, the name a weight on her tongue, condolences offered, a face at hearings, never a player in that bus's fate. Paul's silence gnawed, busy, retired, but she'd try again, her resolve hardening as the first raindrop kissed her cheek. A storm brewing she'd meet head on. Maggie tucked the photo away, her boots crunching gravel as she turned back, the cemetery gate creaking shut behind her. Las Vegas's glow flickered beyond, neon waking. But here, in this quiet, Clara's absence roared, her mother's hope aflame against the dark. She'd go home, call again, Paul, Susan, anyone. But this thread, this shadow in the frame, was hers to pull. A whisper from 27 years past, she'd chase until it spoke. Unbeknownst to her, this day, etched in loss, had spun a thread poised to unravel a truth she'd never dared imagine. The Las Vegas evening settled into a restless hush as Margaret Maggie Ellison stepped off the bus near Evelyn Hart's neighborhood, the rain-slicked streets reflecting the last glimmers of dusk on September 28, 2023. Her sweater clung damp to her shoulders, the chill biting deeper after her cemetery vigil. Clara's daisies laid, her unanswered calls to Paul Tran a silent drumbeat. But the class photo burned in her purse, Evelyn's stern smile a riddle she couldn't leave unanswered. Maggie's hazel eyes narrowed against the drizzle, her boots scuffing wet pavement as she turned down a familiar lane, memory pulling her toward the principal's old home. She'd meant to head back, home, dry clothes, another call, but the bus's route had grazed this street, a jolt of recognition sparking as Clara's "Bye, Mom" echoed from 27 years past. Evelyn Hart, condolences murmured, a figure at hearings, had never loomed large in that tale. Mr. Daniel Foster, the teacher, vanishing with the class, the sole thread police chased until it frayed. Yet the photo, Clara's grin, Tommy's wave, Evelyn among them, cracked that script. Susan's whispers she went, a whisper Maggie couldn't mute. Her pulse thrummed. What if she knew? And she walked on, resolve outweighing the rain. The neighborhood had shifted, some houses spruced with fresh paint, others sagging under time, but Maggie's feet knew the way, tracing a path from protests long ago, parents demanding answers Evelyn had met with nods and tears. She stopped before a bungalow, white siding faded, hedges trim, a sedan in the drive, a faint memory clicking. This one. The photo trembled in her grip as she climbed the porch, her breath fogging in the cool air, the drizzle a soft patter against the awning. She knocked, 3 sharp raps, her heart thudding. No plan beyond, "Why are you there?" Silence stretched, no footsteps, no flicker behind the curtains, and Maggie's shoulders sagged, doubt creeping. Wrong house? Gone? Until voices murmured, the door swinging wide. Evelyn Hart stood there, gray hair shorter now, lines deeper, her brown eyes widening, flanked by a young woman, mid-30s, auburn hair framing a wary face. "Can I help you?" Evelyn asked, voice kind but tight, her composure faltering as Maggie stepped forward, rain dripping from her sleeve. "I'm Maggie Ellison, Clara's mom," she said, watching recognition flare, Evelyn's polite mask slipping as she stuttered. "Oh, Mrs. Ellison, Maggie's grip tightened on the photo. "Got a question," her tone steady despite the tremor in her hands. Evelyn fumbled keys, turning to the young woman. "Go inside, make yourself comfy. I'll be right there." Her haste a crack in her calm as the woman hesitated, then vanished into the house, lights blooming within. Maggie caught Evelyn's glance, nervous, darting, and pressed on, pulling the photo free. "This," she said, holding it up. Clara, Tommy, the bus, Evelyn's figure stark. "Why are you here? I thought it was just Foster and a staffer." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, squinting at the image, her breath hitching. "Where'd you get that?" Her tone sharp, then softening as she forced a chuckle. "That's school parking lot, before the trip. Standard shot," she said, hands smoothing her blouse, damp spots blooming where she'd wiped them. Maggie's brow furrowed. "Before?" Susan's whispers clashing with Evelyn's quick nod. "Were you on that bus?" Maggie pressed, voice low, firm, the rain a steady drum behind her. Evelyn's head shook. No, Foster and admin staff went. I stayed. Last-minute issue. Couldn't leave." Her words clipped, her gaze flicking to the house. Maggie's chest tightened. Last minute, Evelyn's unease a thread tugging harder, the young woman's shadow in the doorway, a puzzle she couldn't place. "Anything odd about Foster that day?" she asked, stepping closer, the porch creaking under her weight. Evelyn's demeanor shifted, annoyance edging her voice. "No, Mrs. Ellison. I told police everything, over and over. Never thought him capable. Heartbreaking for me, too." Her brown eyes softened. Close that chapter. But her hands twisted, betraying the calm she wore. Maggie's throat caught. "Can't believe she's just gone?" Tears pricking as she dabbed them with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," Maggie said, voice softening. "Just 27 years, and this..." She waved the photo. "It's new." Evelyn's expression eased, a brief hug offered. "I get it. Parents come today, always." Her warmth fleeting as she stepped back. "Thanks for your time," Maggie murmured, tucking the photo away, her boots retreating as Evelyn's "sorry for your afternoon" followed, the door easing shut. Maggie paused. Something's off. Evelyn's stutter, her haste, the woman inside, a crack in the story she'd clung to, Foster alone, Evelyn absent. The rain thickened, drumming the sidewalk as Maggie trudged back, the bus stop's shelter a dim refuge. Her mind raced. "Before the trip," Evelyn said, but her flinch, that glance, lied. Susan's whispers gnawed. Parents thought she went. Yet Maggie, active, involved, missed it. The young woman, who? Evelyn childless, her guest a shadow Maggie couldn't name. She pulled her phone, Paul Tran's number, still silent. Her fingers hovering, call again? But the rain blurred her screen, her resolve a thread stretching tight. "Clara, what did she know?" she whispered. The photo's weight a doorway opening, a truth she'd chase beyond this dusk. The Las Vegas rain thickened into a steady curtain as Margaret Maggie Ellison trudged away from Evelyn Hart's bungalow, the class photo a damp weight in her purse, its edges curling under the drizzle of September 28, 2023. Her hazel eyes squinted against the downpour, her sweater sodden as she reached the bus stop's flimsy shelter. The neon glow of the city a faint smear beyond the storm. Evelyn's words, "before the trip," rang hollow, her stutter and nervous glance clashing with 27 years of certainty. Mr. Daniel Foster, alone with Clara's class, a story Maggie had clung to until the yellow bus snapshot cracked it open. The young woman inside, who, gnawed at her, a shadow she couldn't place. The bus loomed through the mist, its headlights slicing the dark, and Maggie boarded, settling by a fogged window, her breath a fleeting cloud as she pulled the photo free. Clara's curls, Tommy's wave, Evelyn's tight smile. Her fingers traced her daughter's grin. What did she know? Evelyn's nothing odd, a brittle shield against Susan's, whispers she went. Maggie's resolve flared. 27 years of vigils, Clara's empty grave, Tom's fading, we'll find her. And this thread, this unease, pulled her back to the cemetery, not home. She'd laid daisies, but the rain, the photo, Evelyn's flinch, something's there, drove her to return, a mother's instinct louder than the storm. The cemetery gates creaked as Maggie stepped off the bus, the rain a soft roar against the iron, her boots sinking into muddy gravel as she retraced her path. Clara's stone waited, Clara Ellison, 1987 to 1996, daisies drooping underwater, a silent marker she'd honored hours ago. She paused, breath fogging, then moved deeper. Tommy's plot nearby, Susan's loss. A twin echo when a figure caught her eye, standing still in the children's section, where most of the vanished class rested in empty graves. Maggie's pulse quickened. Her, the young woman from Evelyn's, auburn hair plastered wet, her shoulders trembling as she gazed at a headstone. Maggie approached, rain dripping from her hood, her voice soft against the storm. "Excuse me?" Not wanting to startle. The woman turned, mid-30s, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed, fear flashing as recognition sparked. "We meet again," Maggie said, stepping closer, the photo a lifeline in her purse. "Saw you at Evelyn Hart's, Principal Hart's." The woman, Julia, Maggie would learn, wiped tears, shifting uncomfortably, her gaze darting as if cornered. "I'm Maggie Ellison, Clara's mom," Maggie added, gentle, steady, watching Julia's breath catch, her hands clasping tight. "I'm Julia Kane," she murmured, voice barely above the rain, her eyes flickering to Tommy's stone. "Thomas Miles, 1987 to 1996. Come here every year, later, after." She trailed off, trembling, and Maggie's chest tightened. After parents leave, a ritual Maggie knew too well. "Grieving who?" Maggie asked, soft but firm, rain streaking her glasses. "Were you one of them, the class?" Julia hesitated, lips parting, then a slow nod, reluctant, heavy, her auburn hair clinging as she whispered, "Yes." Maggie's breath hitched, a survivor, 27 years of silence shattering, her heart pounding as she stepped closer. "You're alive," Maggie said, voice cracking, tears mingling with rain, Clara, Tommy, hope and dread colliding. Julia's eyes widened. "You don't want to know?" Her tone sharp, defensive, hands clutching tighter. "I do," Maggie pressed, gentle but unyielding, pulling the photo free, Clara's grin, the bus. "This was my daughter's class. Clara, Rory, we called her." Julia froze, her gaze locking on the image, a choked laugh escaping. "Rory was such an ass." Warm, bitter-sweet. A jolt that stopped Maggie cold. "You knew her?" she gasped, urgency surging, rain forgotten. Julia's nod was faint. "Yeah," her voice trembling, tears slipping as she clutched her arms. "She didn't make it," she whispered, eyes dropping and Maggie's world tilted. "No." A sob rising, she swallowed hard. "What happened?" she asked, voice steady despite the quake within, needing truth over silence. Julia shook her head. "Too much," panic flashing as she stepped back, rain streaking her face. "Please," Maggie begged, closing the gap. 27 years, I come here, no answers. If you know, tell me." Julia's breath hitched, her resolve crumbling. "Not here," her eyes darting, fear raw. Maggie's hand hovered. Then where? Her voice firm, a mother's plea piercing the storm. Julia's gaze softened, conflict warring within. "Station, police." Her words a surrender, shaky but sure. "I'll talk, but there." Maggie's heart leapt. Truth, 27 years of shadows parting. Evelyn's flinch, this woman, a survivor, her daughter's name on her lips. "Thank you," Maggie whispered, tears streaming, rain a baptism as Julia nodded, trembling. "Why Evelyn's?" Maggie asked, soft, probing, Julia's flinch sharp. Later, at the station, her voice a thread Maggie seized, a doorway opening wide. The cemetery hummed, rain on stone, wind through sage. As Maggie stood, Julia beside her, a survivor's gaze meeting a mother's hope. Clara's stone loomed, empty, eternal, and Maggie's resolve blazed. For you, this thread, this woman, a crack in the veil she'd chased to its end. Julia's Rory lingered, proof she'd lived, laughed, 27 years of questions poised to spill. "Let's go," Maggie said, voice firm, leading Julia toward the gate, the rain a chorus to a truth unfolding, a step beyond Las Vegas's quiet into a past she'd never let fade. The Las Vegas night pressed heavy against the windows of the police station as Margaret Maggie Ellison stepped inside, the rain-soaked chill of September 28th, 2023, clinging to her sweater, her boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum. Julia Kane followed, auburn hair plastered, her pale face drawn, her trembling hands clutching a worn photo frame. The survivor's gaze Maggie had met at the cemetery now fixed on the sterile waiting room ahead. Susan Miles and her husband Matthew trailed behind, summoned by Maggie's urgent call. She's alive, a survivor. Their stunned silence a mirror to her own racing heart. Maggie's hazel eyes darted. Officer Paul Tran's desk, empty. Her earlier calls unanswered, but Julia's station police had pulled her here, 27 years of silence cracking open. The photo in her purse, Clara, Tommy, the yellow bus, Evelyn Hart, burned. Julia's Rory didn't make it. A dagger she'd borne through the rain, yet her resolve blazed. Truth now. "Sit," she said, guiding Julia to a hard plastic chair, Susan and Matthew settling beside her, their faces pale as the fluorescent hum buzzed overhead. Julia's nod, "I'll talk," echoed from the graves, a promise Maggie clung to, her breath shallow with dread and hope. Footsteps clipped, Officer Tran emerged, gray hair thinning, his gruff voice softening as he spotted her. "Maggie, sorry, tied up earlier." His eyes widened. "You found something?" And Maggie's voice steadied. Julia Kane, she's from Clara's class, alive." Tran's jaw tightened, motioning them to an interview room, metal table, mirrored wall. The air thick as Julia sat, Maggie beside her, Susan and Matthew hovering near the door. "Name?" Tran asked, pen poised, and Julia's whisper cut through. "Julia Kane, one of the 15, her hands trembling as she set the frame down, a blurred girl's face staring back. Maggie's pulse thrummed. 15, Clara, Tommy. 27 years of questions poised to spill. "Tell us," Tran said, voice firm but gentle. And Julia's breath hitched, tears brimming as she began. "I'm a survivor. Only one, I think." Her voice cracked. "Principal Hart, Evelyn, knew." And Maggie's gasp joined Susan's, Matthew's hand gripping the wall. "Knew?" Tran pressed, leaning in, and Julia nodded. "She hid me, 12 years ago, after I escaped." Her words a flood breaking free, the room tilting as Maggie clutched the table, Evelyn's nothing odd, a lie unmasking. "She planned it," Julia said, eyes dropping. "The trip, Big Bend, was a lie. Debts, loan sharks, threatened her. She framed Foster." Maggie's mind reeled. Foster, the suspect, Julia's voice trembling. "They sabotaged the bus, killed the driver, dumped him. No body found. Took us, Foster too, to Mexico, border area." Susan's sob broke. "Tommy?" And Maggie's. "Clara followed, raw, desperate." Julia's tears fell. "Trafficked, girls exploited, boys sold overseas. Clara, Rory, died that day. Overdose. Tommy too, dosage wrong." Her whisper a blade, slicing through 27 years of hope. Maggie's world shattered, tears streaming, a wail rising she choked back. Clara, gone. Susan collapsing into Matthew's arms, their grief a tide drowning the room. "Why hide?" Tran asked, voice tight, and Julia's gaze lifted. "Escaped. 12 years back. A man who used me. Too broken. Evelyn found me, paid for a life, apartment, silence. Said it'd hurt more, families knowing." Maggie's fist clenched. "Hurt more?" Evelyn's flinch at her door flashing. Julia's Rory, a lifeline she'd guarded. "She lied," Maggie rasped. Kept this from us." Tran scribbled, reopening it, "Now." His radio crackling as he barked orders. "Unit to Hearts, arrest warrant." Maggie's breath caught. Justice. Evelyn's closed that chapter, a mask crumbling. Julia's truth a torch in the dark. Why today? Susan asked, voice frail, and Julia's eyes met hers. Grieve here, Tommy's grave. Every year after my parents saw Maggie, knew her. Maggie's tears blurred. You gave me Clara's last laugh. Julia's such an ass, a bittersweet gift, a shard of her daughter's light. You're safe, Tran said, softening. Witness protection, traffickers might hunt you. No charges, trauma's enough. Julia nodded. I'll help, find others, her voice steadying, a weight lifting as Tran turned to Maggie. We'll chase this. Mexico, the ring, thanks to her. Maggie's chest heaved. Closure. Pain raw, but answers real. Clara's fate a wound she'd bear with truth. Tell them, she said, voice firm. All the families deserve this. Susan's nod echoing, Matthew's grip tightening, their shared loss a bond now lit by fact. The station buzzed. Officers moving, radios crackling, Tran's hearts in custody, filtering through as Maggie sat. Susan beside her, Julia's frame trembling between. How'd she know? Maggie asked, soft, urgent, Julia's reply faint. Found me, lost, broken, offered silence for safety. Evelyn's shadow loomed. Debts, threats, a conspiracy Maggie hadn't dreamed. Foster a pawn, Clara a casualty, 27 years a lie. You're brave, Maggie whispered, hand on Julia's. You gave us this. Tears falling as Susan murmured. Tommy too. A chorus of grief and gratitude. Rain drummed the roof, Las Vegas's neon a distant hum as Maggie stood, for Clara, her resolve aflame against the storm. Julia's confession unraveled it. Evelyn's arrest, a case reborn. Truth piercing the veil she'd faced at that grave. What now? Matthew asked, voice rough, and Maggie's gaze met his. We heal with this. A step beyond silence, a mother's fight answered, if not undone. The station's hum swelled, justice stirring, and Maggie knew this night, raw with loss, had opened a door she'd never let close. The Las Vegas police station thrummed with a restless pulse as Margaret Maggie Ellison stood in the interview room, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across her tear-streaked face, on September 28, 2023. The rain's steady drum against the windows mingled with the crackle of radios, a chaotic symphony to Julia Kane's confession, Clara and Tommy gone, overdosed in a trafficking nightmare orchestrated by Principal Evelyn Hart. Maggie's hazel eyes burned, her sweater still damp from the storm, as Susan Miles sobbed into Matthew's shoulder beside her, their grief a raw echo of her own shattered hope. Julia sat across the metal table, pale, trembling, her auburn hair clinging wet, the framed photo of her younger self, a silent witness to 27 years of hidden survival. Officer Paul Tran scribbled notes, his gruff voice steadying the room. Hart's unit dispatched, arrest imminent. Maggie's breath caught, Evelyn, the principal's nothing odd from hours ago, a lie crumbling under Julia's truth. Debts, threats, a stage trip to Big Ben Park masking a trafficking ring. She framed Foster, Julia had whispered, and Maggie's fists clenched. Daniel, innocent, 27 years of blame unraveling. Clara's fate a wound reopened with answers. Tran's radio buzzed. Suspect in custody. And Maggie's pulse surged, Susan's gasp a twin jolt as Matthew gripped her tighter. Stay here, Tran said, rising. Need her statement next, and slipped out, leaving the room thick with silence, Julia's eyes downcast, her frame shrinking under the weight of her words. Maggie stepped closer. You're brave, her voice soft but firm, hand brushing Julia's shoulder, tears pricking anew. You gave us Clara, Tommy, truth. Susan's nod. Yes. Choked through sobs, Matthew's thank you, rough, their shared loss a bond now lit by fact. Minutes stretched, rain a relentless hum, until boots echoed, Tran returning with a nod. Evelyn Hart, booked. Maggie's chest heaved, justice, visions of Evelyn's nervous flinch at her door flashing. Julia's, she hid me, a thread pulled tight. Confessed? Susan asked, voice frail, and Tran's jaw tightened. Full, debts drove her, loan sharks threatened. Staged it. Foster took the fall. Maggie's mind reeled. Mexico, trafficking, Clara. Julia's tale, a nightmare confirmed. Girls exploited, boys sold, her daughter lost to an overdose. A truth slicing deeper than silence. She's here, Tran added, glancing at the mirror. Downstairs, processing. And Maggie's resolve flared. Face her, but Tran's hand rose. Not yet. Procedure first. Julia's voice broke through. I'll testify. Everything. Her gaze lifting, steadying, a survivor's fire flickering beneath her pain. Protection set, Tran said. Traffickers might hunt. Witness program, no charges. His tone softening. You've been through hell. Julia's nod, for them, met Maggie's eyes. Clara, Tommy. A vow shared. A lifeline forged in Las Vegas's sterile glow. The station buzzed. Officers darting, phones ringing. Trans, Mexico's next, rings active. A drumbeat of action, the case reborn from Julia's whisper. Families? Matthew asked, voice rough, and Tran's nod was firm. Notifying all, tonight. They'll know. Maggie's throat caught. Closure, 27 years of vigils. Clara's empty grave, a truth to bear forward. What's next? Susan murmured, wiping tears, and Tran's eyes met hers. Charges, hearts facing conspiracy, trafficking. Julia's key might find others. Maggie's heart leapt. Others alive? Hope a fragile spark against the dark. Footsteps clattered. 2 officers led Evelyn Hart past the room, cuffs glinting, her gray hair mussed, her face downcast. I'm sorry, she mumbled, eyes catching Maggie's, Susan's, Matthew's, her voice a thread lost to the officer's push toward booking. Maggie's fists balled. Sorry. Evelyn's closed that chapter, a lie that hid Julia, buried Clara, a debt paid in children's lives. She knew, Maggie rasped. Susan's all this time, a twin fury, Matthew's grip tightening. How could she? Their pain a chorus rising with the storm. Tran returned. She's talking full scope, and Maggie's gaze locked on him. What scope? His voice steadied. Trip sabotaged, driver killed, foster taken, kids split, Mexico border, then beyond. Organ trafficking, labor, she planned it, sharks enforced. Maggie's stomach twisted. Clara's last breath, Susan's sob echoing, Matthew's monster, a growl. Julia escaped, 12 years back, Tran added. Hart funded her silence, apartment, cash, kept her from you. Maggie's tears fell, kept her from us. Evelyn's shadow, a betrayal deeper than grief. We'll chase it, Tran said. Mexico's on, might find survivors. His radio crackling as orders flew. Maggie's mind raced, Clara gone, but others? A purpose igniting. Tell them, every family, and Julia, help her. Susan's nod. She's one of ours now. Matthews agreed, sealing it, their loss a vow to mend what they could. Witness protection's tight, Tran assured. She'll start fresh, safe. And Julia's faint, thank you, met Maggie's eyes. You gave us this. A bond forged in Las Vegas's hum. A survivor's courage their torch. The rain eased, stars piercing the dark, as Maggie stepped to Julia. We'll fight for Clara, Tommy, you. Her voice firm, tears drying. Susan's hand found hers. Together. Matthew's nod a pillar, their grief a fuel for justice begun. Trans, cases live, hearts just the start, rang, Mexico, traffickers, a net widening, and Maggie's resolve blazed. For you, Clara, 27 years of silence broken, a mother's purpose reborn. Evelyn's cuffs, Julia's truth, a step beyond the veil, a fight she'd see through. Las Vegas's quiet, a stage for answers unfolding. The Las Vegas sun dipped low over the Strip on September 28, 2024, casting a golden glow through the windows of a quiet cafe where Margaret Maggie Ellison sat, her hazel eyes tracing the steam rising from her coffee. A year had passed since Julia Kane's confession shattered 27 years of silence. Clara's fate unveiled, Evelyn Hart's arrest a crack in a long-held veil, and Maggie's chestnut hair, now fully silvered, framed a face etched with grief but softened by purpose. Across from her, Evelyn Hart waited, gray hair cropped short, her brown eyes dimmed, practical slacks replacing silk, a woman humbled by a year behind bars and therapy's slow chisel. Maggie's twins, Liam and Sophie, Clara's siblings, now 4, played in Susan Miles' backyard miles away. Their laughter a distant echo she'd fought to preserve. The station's chaos, Evelyn in cuffs, Julia's Rory died, had ignited a fire that carried her here, a mother's valor forged from loss. "I've changed," Evelyn said, voice low, hands fidgeting. "Therapy," Jessica pushed it. "Failed you, Clara. Sorry." Maggie's chest tightened. Sorry, 27 years too late. Yet the plea held no cash, no guile, a shift she tested. "Why hide her?" she asked, steady, the photo of Clara's class a memory she'd retired to a drawer. Evelyn's gaze dropped. "Julia found her broken 12 years back. Debts ruled me, sharks threatened. I staged it, framed Foster. She escaped. I paid her silence, thought it spared you pain." Maggie's jaw clenched. Spared? Clara's overdose? Tommy's too. A truth Julia's courage had forced free. "Pain's the unknown," she said, firm. "You stole closure." Evelyn's nod slow, tears brimming. "I see now. Selfish." Susan's voice. "Monster," from that night echoed, but Maggie saw a shell, not a beast, her anger tempered by time. "Kids, Liam, Sophie, can they know you?" Evelyn asked, tentative. "Supervised?" Maggie's pause long. "Actions, not words, prove it. A door ajar, not wide." The cafe hummed, clinking cups, soft chatter, as Maggie sipped Las Vegas's neon waking beyond. A year had reshaped her, Julia's truth a tide-sweeping justice, Evelyn convicted, conspiracy, trafficking, Mexico raids, netting traffickers, 2 boys found alive, their names a whisper of hope Maggie carried for the others. Julia thrived, witness protection shielding her in a new city, her calls to Maggie. "I'm healing," a bond forged in that station's glow. Maggie's home bloomed, twins tumbling in a backyard, Susan's weekly dinners, a network of cousins and widows, Diana's casseroles, Ben's tough lady. A family born from ashes Evelyn couldn't touch. "I'll keep fighting," Maggie said, voice steady. For Clara, Tommy, Julia's life. Evelyn's "I'll try," a faint echo she'd watch, not trust. The station's promise, case live, had borne fruit. Officer Tran's updates, more arrests, Mexico, a net widening, Clara's name honored in every file. Susan met her here monthly, healing together. Matthew's quiet, "We'll see it through," a pillar, their grief a shared flame, now guiding, not consuming. Maggie stood, time proves change, leaving Evelyn with her coffee, her twins' safety a boundary she'd never bend. Back home, the desert dusk painted her yard, Liam's truck zooming, Sophie's bunny flopping. As Maggie watched from the porch, Susan beside her, tea steaming. "Julia called," Susan said, settled, teaching art. A survivor's dawn Maggie had vowed to nurture. There, one of ours, from that night, a promise kept. The support group, widows, cousins, wove tight. Playdates, meals, a Las Vegas quiet turned vibrant. Clara's absence a wound softened by purpose. "They'd be proud," Susan murmured. Clara, Tommy, and Maggie's nod. "Yeah," held tears, not despair. A mother's fight now a beacon. A letter arrived, Evelyn's script. Supervised visits proposed, Maggie set it aside. Prove it. Her focus on Julia's next call, Tran's update. 3 more caught, Mexico. The ring crumbled, justice inching closer. Clara's name, a rally for families. Maggie met monthly, their "thank you," a chorus she bore for her girl. Grief lingered, 27 years a scar, but valor shone. We heal by seeking truth. A legacy etched in Liam's laugh, Sophie's hum, a peace Maggie claimed. Las Vegas's glow a backdrop to a dawn she'd forged. The night deepened, stars piercing the desert sky. As Maggie tucked the twins in, their "love you, mommy," a balm to a heart once hollowed. Susan's together rang, Julia's healing, a tapestry of loss and light, a mother's vow unbroken. For you, Clara, 27 years, a shadow lifted, a fight won not with answers alone, but with purpose. She closed their door, sleep tight, and stepped outside, the city's hum a quiet hymn, her valor a dawn no silence could dim. Maggie Ellison turned Las Vegas's silence into a chorus of truth. 27 years of loss unveiled Clara's fate, birthing justice from pain. Julia's courage and Evelyn's fall prove resilience lights even the darkest veils. Every step forward heals. Your strength can too. Honor the fight. Find your dawn. If Maggie's valor moved you, hit that subscribe button. More stories of hope await. Like, share your thoughts or town. I'd love to hear. Let's keep seeking light together. See you next time.